This is SSCA, the Seven Seas Cruising Association, Cape Hatteras for cruisers, snowbirds, and Passagemakers. My name is Joan Conover. I'm president of SSCA, and I have lived in the Hampton Roads, Chesapeake area for over 25 years. We have crossed the stream many, many times, back and forth to the Eastern Caribbean, to Europe, and back again, East Coast, Bermuda, the Northern Caribbean islands, Eastern Caribbean, Cuba, the Keys, and followed the stream wherever the stream goes. If you would like to have more information about Seven Seas, it's www.ssca.org. What is SSCA? We are a worldwide association of cruisers helping cruisers. We are a cruising association, both live aboard and cruisers part-time or snowbirds. It's for those actively cruising, preparing for near or offshore voyages, or for those wanting to cruise. We're friends, we know each other, we gather together, we passage together. SSA is a nonprofit helping cruisers in the communities we visit. So let's talk about what Cape Hatteras is. We're going to talk weather impacts. We're going to talk circulation currents, Gulf Stream, and the landform that you need to be aware of on the East Coast US or wherever reefs and currents and rivers and barrier islands form. We're going to talk a little on Cape Hatteras inlets. We'll talk about research buoys and wind farms that are being installed on the East Coast around Hatteras. Cape Hatteras is a unique landform. It's a cape, which is a high point of land extending into a river or lake or ocean. The major land masses are Cape Horn, Cape Good Hope, and Cape Hatteras. Sometimes we forget it so close to the US that this is a major cape, and it's very dangerous. There have been a lot of shipwrecks there. Capes have converging currents. They have different temperatures, salinity. They have shelf currents, and suddenly converging with deep ocean waters, you get waves. You get wind, you get features you have to be aware of as a cruiser. So let's talk a bit about weather and the patterns we'll probably see this spring and summer. Very unique. Okay, current weather patterns. We are in year 3 of La Nina's impacts. This slide shows a typical weather pattern, and you have noticed, I'm sure, that we have floods in the West Coast. We are getting storm passages over the middle of the US and up into New England. It's been warmer here in the Hampton area, drier in some other areas. March 25th, we participated with NOAA with a weather seminar with SSCA speaker and Commodore Frank Smith, where we provide the input to NOAA, but then we also get the weather information from NOAA. And right now, we're not sure what the future is for La Nina. Climate impacts, if you look on the left at top, you'll see a winter pattern. Notice the flooding. There was flooding in Australia. Notice the blue, cold and wet. Notice the brown, drier, and that's in the Gulf areas. Notice off of Africa. Notice in up in Alaska and whatnot, cold and wet. But then you get into June, August, it becomes a summer system. Now, if La Nina fades to neutral, another system called El Nino will form, and that will be different. But right now, since La Nina is still holding in there, this would be the summer pattern. It would be wetter in the Southern Caribbean. It will be wet in Asia, Far East. It will be dry in Australia. This is the known pattern for this kind of weather system. It's a whole book on what La Nina and El Nino is, but it switches back and forth. And it's actually a phase of a larger circulation and weather and climate modifying systems that involve our entire Earth. With La Nina, storms track over the middle US and the North Carolinas and then up. We've seen that. And that's a typical weather pattern in spring that we're seeing right now. Weather questions, this is live, but unfortunately we don't have a feedback mechanism, but you can certainly email president@ssca.org. So let's talk about Cape Hatteras current. We talked about the weather. Let's talk about circulation. Currents around Hatteras, and all capes have some variant of this. And you'll see at the top left, you'll see the East Coast US, you'll see the orange Gulf Stream. We'll go into that in a minute. The Gulf Stream has unique characteristics, and we'll go into those. There's something called the Mid-Atlantic Bight, and that's in the north of Hatteras, and that's the shelf areas of the shelf water that we find in that direction that is cold. This is coming from the north. There's a Southern Atlantic Bight, which is adding some new vocabulary to everyone, and that is the shelf water that is coming north from the warm tropics up to Hatteras, and they converge at Hatteras. So process exchange at Cape Hatteras, it's called PEACH, but this is a graph from them. And if you will notice, there is a large collective circular area. That's the Slope Sea Gyre, and that is north of the Gulf Stream, and you'll probably see a lot of eddies along that direction. On the south side of the Gulf Stream, you will find other eddies, and we will talk a little bit about that. You'll see where there's blue arrows going along the coastline from Maine south towards Hatteras. That's a shelf water current that's going south. You'll see a shelf break jet. Now that is a strong, a couple knots sometimes, batch of water that is going from the northeast towards the southwest and converges at Hatteras. There's a Hatteras front, which is the little green arrow inside the small box. We're going to look at that box in a minute. And then you have the green arrow you'll see at the very bottom of the screen and going up to Hatteras. That is the return currents, warm current, shelf currents coming from Florida. The blue, heavy, deep western boundary current runs along the gyre over Hatteras at that same point that everybody else is at, and then comes further south and then drops south and joins other exchange currents that's part of the worldwide circulation. But this is to give you the words and the names. We're going to go look at the little box now that's in the center. So you can see that above the box, you have the gyre, the northern circulation area, and below the box, you have the southern circulation area. Now, one thing to point out, between on the lower left, you'll see the green arrows and the orange Gulf Stream. In between those two areas, there's somewhat of a counter current. So if you're trying to go south, you kind of go to what they call a 100-fathom line or along, and you'll find a current that's a little bit more favorable. But look on the current, windy, predict wind, whatever, to find that sweet spot. And here's a bird's eye view of the area of consideration that they have the detailed currents on, and we'll zoom in on that in a second. But that's what we're talking about, Hatteras. And here's a blow up of that little box, and you can see it over on the right side. You see, and let's start at noon, the blue shelf current, the MAB, the lavender shelf break jet, which comes south and then joins into the Gulf Stream. But remember, this is cold water. Then you have the green shelf water coming north. That's greater salinity, warm water flooding up along that shelf. It's going to go into the Gulf Stream. And then you have the Hatteras shelf itself, which acts kind of as a guide. I call it a tour guide for some of these currents. The big red X is where people sometimes get into trouble with north winds and all these currents converging. Imagine those currents with a north wind, or in some cases, north of the Gulf Stream, those currents would be adversely affected by south winds. So you're darned if you do and darned if you don't. Your weather is the most important thing to know when you're going around Hatteras. You need to know the physics, the currents and whatnot, but weather and the direction of the wind is really important, because this is a point where the Gulf Stream goes along a flat shelf or continental boundary to a fast flowing jet of water. It's just like Niagara Falls down there, a sudden drop in depth. And I have some slides to show that. So here we're looking at that again, zoomed in, and I'll let that go for a second, but you can also see the 60-meter line. that is in that area between 60 and 200 meter, that is the counterflow that if you were to pick that up, it will give you a little bit of a lift towards the south. You have to check your charts, the weather charts and the current charts. This whole area, that's Diamond Shoals in the center. So rounding the Cape offshore depends on weather, wind, squalls. You may have the wind, but you might have the squalls and currents, and your direction of travel and your destination. Give space and respect and weight the weather you need to have. If you're going offshore, either to or from, cross the Gulf Stream quickly in favorable winds. Timing depends on your boat speed, but we usually figure from the mouth of the bay to the Gulf Stream is about 18 hours. A day, we plan a day to transit the Gulf Stream, reverse it for Western travel, a 3-day window. And always pick the best transition spot of the Gulf Stream where you're going to cross it based on your route, winds, squalls, eddies, and currents. East and northeast winds against the Gulf Stream cause a very rapid build of state, and squalls can be suddenly blow up suddenly, and the electrical storm can be mind numbing, especially if you're in a boat and you're getting lightning strikes all around you. One of the most scary visuals I have in my memory is coming up through the Gulf Stream and looking up in the direction for Beaufort, because we're going to head into Beaufort, and seeing a very large funnel cloud drop onto the water right in front of us. And it was immense. It was eye-opening. And it lifted out just as quickly, but it was shocking. So let's talk about nearshore rounding Cape Hatteras and the currents. Those barrier islands north of Cape Hatteras can become a lee shore in strong north and northeast winds. So remember that. You've got currents against you. If you have the wind going with those currents and you're trying to go north, it's maybe a little bit difficult. And also the south winds against the south flowing shelf current, you can get chop in that area. It's a shelf, it's choppy, but it's doable. It's just be aware it can be seasick time. Your north and northeast winds, I don't go in a northeast wind into the Gulf Stream, period. I've learned. And I don't, if I see a low anywhere near the Gulf Stream now, I will not go. I'll wait. You can always find a time to pass. The Hatteras inlets you can have effects from, because they are just like the inlets down in the Caribbean, or some of the islands. You can have a rage. You can have tides pulling in and out. So if you get close to look in to see what's going on, you can get sucked in, and that has happened to boats. Oregon Inlet, you cannot go through. It's a no-go area. I would not recommend it at all for sailboats. You should be inside the Gulf Stream if you're rounding the Cape, either going north or south. So don't go into the stream and stay safe. Watch for your eddies. Consider tidal effects at mouths of bays and inlets. And you can always do the ICW route to Beaufort, North Carolina, if weather doesn't support outside. For my personal preference, I give myself a break, pick good weather windows, take my seasickness medicine the day before we leave, and have all my meals ready, and the crew knows what to do, and we know what to do, and we get across where we're supposed to go based on our router guidance. Now I want to show this little area to the south of Hatteras. Now this is a NOAA wind wave chart, and I looked at this one and thought, this is really interesting. Look at that funny pattern for a current right off of Charleston. And this is a Charleston bump area. You need to be familiar with these currents, especially if you're going north or south through this area. And I thought I'd include this because this gives a really good idea of that shelf, that southern shelf current area. And also notice the Gulf Stream is blue. And you can see the currents. There's actually a Florida Hatteras slope, okay? And you can see that 40 meter just in the inside of that. Well, there you're going to get a counter current that will let you south. But if you get over too far over, you're going to pick up the other current with the Gulf Stream and the adverse current if you're trying to go south. And this is an old slide, but it hasn't changed that much. As you go further out, and you'll see where it says in red Lake Escarpment, that's an elevated area. So this whole area is kind of this flat area of water coming up from the south over this flattened area. And then it gets right up near Hatteras and the bottom falls out like that. When the Gulf Stream falls off, And then remember, this is warm water mixing with cold water. You've got warm and cold mixing together. You've got the stream coming forward, and it's just able to flow and become a jet right off of Hatteras. But you can clearly see the depth that you're going to face. All of this leads to the funneling effect we see at Cape Hatteras. And the graphics are credit to Axelon Free Wiki. And this is the Charleston bump. You can see the bump right here, but you'll find that Gulf Stream meanders there and is rather complicated. I toss this in because it's interesting. And here is the heat heat map that shows the Charleston bump area in the Gulf Stream. And you can very clearly see the areas where it's not at depth, it's up high, it's circulating. You can come places where there's Gulf Stream goes away, it comes back, you have an eddy in front of you, so be careful with your charts. Now, I'm going to use a weather example from Windy, but I usually use predict wind for waves, current, and Gulf Stream. And several systems and apps provide weather features. Predict wind, as I said, there's a lot of them. NOAA has free weather to download from their website. We use Predict Wind, we use NOAA, and we use Marine Weather Center anytime we cross the Gulf Stream. So let's look at windy weather for baseline. You're looking at Hatteras. You're looking at a slight squall or rain situation off of the beach, but you've got a north wind, kind of light north wind as you're coming south from the bay. Or if you were going north from, say, Charleston, you'd be headed a bit. So this is one piece of the pie. The next piece of the pie is this. You've got north winds at 19 knots. However, that might be doable. You might be able to do it, you know, kind of cut out and cut down and make it. But look at the waves. 9-foot wave with an 8-second period is not fun. And then also look at the Gulf Stream on the lower right, where I've kept all of the locations about the same. You can see that the currents, which may be going with the wind there, but the minute they get a little further out to the Gulf Stream, you're going to have some big changes. And look at the meanders. They're just all over. You really have to watch those meanders. I would not go in this situation. I'd wait. Now, where can you get Gulf Stream images and where to view the data? National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, has a website, and you'll be able to use these slides afterwards. We'll post them. You can see the colors, the warmth of the water, and they chart. And this is a recent image. I picked it the 9th or 10th of March this year. So you can see some of the eddies and some of the meanders. You see the lower meander around Charleston, and then it goes out by the off Hatteras and then to the northeast. You also see the blue cold water coming down. And then further north is very dark, cold blue ocean ice water. It's cold, and you may have a few bergs up in there. Now, Jennifer Clark is known for her Gulf Stream images, and a lot of commercial routers will use her products. You can sign up for a trip as well. Note on her chart from Jennifer Clark's Gulf Stream, and this is from the 1911 or something, or maybe 17th. It's an older chart, but the idea is the same. You have clockwise circulating warm eddies north of the Gulf Stream, counterclockwise circulating cold eddies south of the Gulf Stream. And you'll see that in green and yellow. You have continental shelf water, again in blue, and slope water in light blue. And next slide is a large view of the above diagram. So you can see how she very carefully mapped this out, put in the temperatures. You can see the direction of the eddy, because if you're trying to go one direction and the eddy is going against you, you're not going to get very far. And what we usually do if we come out and we have an opposing current, we'll test to see which way, motoring the boat in one direction, very slow turn until you find when you get the best speed going into the current. Now let's talk the mixing bowl and the washing machine. again, a little bit, because that's where all those currents come together. That's where all that warm water goes. That's where that cold water goes. Rounding the Cape. So let's talk a bit about routes. There is a barrier island inlet change. There are Hatteras weather research buoys and construction at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. So rounding the Cape has got a little bit harder. Now, some routes around Cape Hatteras, I am not an artist, but you will go from the bay, from Norfolk, going straight out maybe to Bermuda. That's one route. You will go the ICW, and that's over on the left, double arrows. You go down the ICW over land, and you come out at Beaufort, and then you can cut across the Gulf Stream there with the right weather window. Some people will go around the outside and they'll tuck in, or they'll go to Beaufort. Some people will ignore Hatteras and just go up the outside, picking their spot in the Gulf Stream and keep going up north further to New England, New York, or whatnot. You will have some people who will come directly into Beaufort through the Gulf Stream at lower areas. Now I want to show something about chart off of Hatteras. That circle is kind of a difficult area. And you can see the blue arrow that is gives an indication of where that shelf runs, which is about the same direction that the Gulf Stream runs. So think of this as it's forming a jet, it's coming down here and it's running and falling. I would say falling. It's coming off of the shelf and becoming a jet and going into the deep ocean waters. You'll see up on the left, you'll see a small circle. That's a Hatteras inlet, which has been dredged, but it's only dredged to 6 foot. So I don't know that that's a place to go in for sailboats with any keel depths, and probably not for cruisers if you have any wave situation going on. It's called a Hatteras connection, and the inlet changes. It shoals a lot in that area, and they dredged it out, but only 6 foot. And again, Hatteras Inlet is notorious for rages, so you don't go in that one. Once you commit from Chesapeake Bay to Hatteras, you're not going to find a place to go in until you get around the tip of Hatteras. For the Hatteras connector, it may be a possibility, but it's too shallow for most of our boats. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has dredged the inlet. Markers have changed. Small boats can use it, but it's not suggested for cruising boats with any draft. And here's the Hatteras connection. This is from NOAA's charts in Dare County. They've removed the buoys offshore. There's more other buoys that have been added. I don't recommend going here at this point in time until all the maps are updated. They aren't updated yet. And here is actually the picture of the dredging that they did. And if you notice the red in the middle, that is 6 to 4 foot. And the deep red is 4 foot. So it's looking to me more like 7 to 8, maybe in the right corner, but who would want to go there? Now you might want to go inside and sit in the opening, but you can't get in, can't get out. So maybe better to go to the tip of Hatteras. Take lookout. That's an option. Follow the charts. National Park Services suggests boats with draft anchor out by the Cape Lookout Bight behind the spit. You can see that little spit part in a second. Use updated charts and guides and common sense for this article, for this anchorage. You can see the little box over to the right. New objects in the water, Hatteras and Chesapeake Bay. First of all, we have new research buoys. They have the moorings are out. We have more coming in. There's going to be 11. There's going to be stationary objects, wind farms up by Chesapeake Bay. 2 are in place now. Unfortunately for the wind farms, they're 27 miles out by the first large buoy offshore. There's going to be 178 of them by 2026. And it's not clear on access, if it's accessible, sail through it, cruise through it, or what yet. It's all new. So where does the buoys, the research buoys, the weather buoys go? In the red box. There'll be 11 placed there. The green box is where they're going to have 3 mobile gliders. So in the red box, you're going to have 11 buoys, but they will have AIS signals. You'll be able to see them on radar, but be aware they're there. And because they're somewhat temporary, they're the main Pioneer array bar buoys from the research by NOAA. And they decided to put them off here off of Hatteras to research the Gulf Stream. We will be able to access the data live, which is very valuable once they're all in place. But be aware they're there, and be aware there's these little gliders going up and down, 3 of them underwater. And here again, I'm showing you where the Pioneer array and glider location is. You can see it's on the edge of the Gulf Stream, and you can see that edge of the shelf. And what does it look like? A weather buoy. And that's what the glider looks like. And those should be underwater. We shouldn't really see them. I'm assuming they will be at depth, but be aware if you see something like that or see an object in under your boat about that shape, maybe you're seeing your radars or underwater sonar, if you have that, is seeing this glider. Chesapeake Lower Bay, construction is ongoing for the tunnel and Chesapeake Bay bridge tunnels. Expect working barges and cranes, and those are now at the mouth of the bay and offshore at 27 miles. Construction for the wind farm is going to impact vessels due to closures and exclusion zones during installation. Notices will be set out by U.S. Coast Guard local notices to mariners. This does not give us a warm fuzzy, because how many people update their charts with local notices to mariners, and especially not our electronic charts. You have to get new ones all the time to see what's going on. So what is a wind farm construction? This is Dominion Energy installation. It's for 1 wind turbine. There's 27-foot clearance to water from the blades. They put a ship that they have built on pilings, and they build the wind turbine, and there'll be 178 of them. There are 2 out there at the current time. And here's where they're located. There's a buoy out at the mouth of the bay. That's the big entrance buoy that we all look for. And if you'll notice, the colored area is where the farm complex is to be. There's 2 turbines in place. There's underwater cables that go to Virginia Beach. There's a platform. There's 176 more planned. The navigation rules are not clear and need extra expansion or information. They're having to go 80 foot to bedrock, geoengineering and drilling or sounding, or however they figure out where the bedrock is in that area. And I would say that's disruptive. We should not be there when they're doing that on our boat. Here again is another picture. They will have safety vessels and signal buoys. This is supposed to be completed by 2026. They will have ATONs, and they have a contract with Sea Lights for that, for some of them, and notices to local notices to mariners. The Port Authority, U.S. Coast Guard, and U.S. Navy will be informed. And you can look up www.coastalbawind.com for more information. This is a private company putting this in place with government permits. I'm going to leave you with this slide. Here's what these look like, how far they're apart, with ships and maintenance on it. And you can see on the bottom, you'll see 2 big wind tunnel turbines. You'll see the offshore substation, and then they've got an underwater cable that will go to Virginia Beach and the connecting cables. It's a $21 billion project, price tag, they say. So we hope that they'll get it done under budget. I want to thank you for this. I'm going to stop my share. And thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions, you may reach out to 7Cs at president@ssca.org or office@ssca.org, or check out our website. Thank you very much.